Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters. Hello, my friends, and welcome to 7 in the Middle of Nowhere True Horror Stories. Sometimes, while driving on the open highway in the middle of nowhere, we stop and realize how alone we are, how vulnerable we are, and how afraid we are. Here's 7 true middle of nowhere horror stories to get your blood pumping. I had just pulled into a truck stop inside Billings, Montana. I was playing slots and a beautiful American Indian girl was serving drinks. After quite a few drinks, I started chatting with her on a more personal level. She told me that her shift ended in a few hours and she would be behind the truck stop with a case of beer if I felt like partying. I did. I hung around the front of the building, and when everyone started filing out of the doors, I went around back to meet her. I couldn't find her, but I found an older Mexican woman who seemed to know my name and acted as if I had just been talking to her inside. I was buzzed but not drunk or stupid. I knew this wasn't the same person. What also struck me as odd is that she had no personal belongings besides the clothes on her back. No purse, no keyring, nothing. I started to feel a little tripped out because of this and began to act like I didn't know her and didn't want anything to do with her. She became cold and stopped trying to talk to me. Okay, that was weird. I walk all the way back to my truck, right? Climb in the back, change into my sleepwear, and laid on my bunk to read a book. Only a few minutes into the book, I hear 3 loud bangs on the side of my sleeper. It's very loud and terrifying. I open the curtains and rolled down the window to see the young American Indian woman I had been speaking with was standing next to my truck. I immediately picked up something wrong about her. It wasn't her lack of speech, odd, disheveled look, or rigid body movements. It was that her eyes, they were solid black. I couldn't say that the dark night, coupled with a few drinks, could make me think that her eyes were black, but I'm not. When I hit a switch in the back of my truck, the insides light up like a baseball stadium. Her eyes seemed to be pulling the light into them, like miniature black holes. It reminded me of when a woman wearing mascara cries. She kind of looks like a raccoon afterwards. It looked like she had rubbed charcoal around her eyes. It also felt like my body itself was acting on its own accord, like my body was screaming at my fragile psyche to open the door and let her into my truck, despite the fact that she looked terrified and hadn't said a single word to me since meeting her again. I remember having to choke out the word no. It reminded me of when you're on the verge of tears, but you choke through them to speak to someone. I was too terrified to look outside my vents to see if she was still standing outside. I was too terrified that I might have ended up looking back into darkness, only to know, in my mind's eye, that she could be staring right back at me. I've got the shakes from just remembering that. I live in a smallish town about an hour south of Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm a 15-year-old male and a professional mountain biker. I live on the south side of town, but the town is small enough I can ride my bike from one end to the other in around 30 minutes. Anyway, the story happened about a year ago. I got in a fight with my parents about not being able to have a sleepover that night, and rode off to get help over it. As I rode up to a hill, the road that goes all the way through the town, I thought of where to go. I decided I was going to go to a closed-down Flying J on the other side of town. I took off and got there about 30 minutes later. As I was approaching the Flying J, I got an uneasy feeling. I didn't think too much of it and shook it off. But as I rode onto the property, another uneasy feeling came. Trucks still parked there at night, and I had seen drivers in them as I drove past several times. The first thing I noticed was that none of the trucks were running, and none of them had a light on. Now note, it was only about 8:30 p.m., so it was just past dark, and that's when most trucks pull in. I know this because my dad is a truck driver, and I had spent 2 months with him on one truck that summer. I started just riding around to the back of the parking lot with that uneasy feeling getting stronger the farther I went there. About halfway through, I noticed a dark figure standing by one of the trucks. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me or not, but the thought it was just a driver getting some fresh air, maybe. As I started getting closer, I noticed I could see through the figure and see the air intake on the side of the truck. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's on the right front of the doors on both sides. It looks like a big barrel. As I got closer to the figure, I suddenly felt like someone had slugged me in the gut with dread. I looked back up at the figure, and it was suddenly gone. I looked back to where I was going, and a 7-foot-tall, completely black figure stood in front of me. It had red eyes like fireballs, floating in midair. My quick mountain biking reflexes made me swerve to the side of it. I started pedaling as fast as I could and went around a row of trucks. I looked back and the figure was chasing me. I changed into a higher gear and started to get away from the figure. As I rode past the fence, I looked back and stopped right behind it. I rode back home as fast as I could. I didn't tell my parents because why would they believe me? The next day I was hanging out with some friends and told them about it. One of them said they knew kids who used Ouija boards and did really bad stuff there at night. I shook it off until this year, when my dad's trucking company bought the lot. I had to go there late at night to help my dad unload some tarp trucks. Almost every time I'm there, I see that figure standing by something, staring at me. My uncle was a truck driver for many years. He spent several years doing cross-country trips, often loading up his trailer in the middle of the night. While he waited for his trailer to be loaded, he'd make his way over to a nearby truck stop, have a late-night meal, and talk with any other drivers there. After a while, he would make friends with the drivers that were on a somewhat similar schedule. He befriended this particular guy that he would run into about once a month or so. One night, the guy invites him back to his semi. He wants to show him something that he's built. This guy's semi has a sleeper on the back, so it's pretty big. Basically, it's a semi-truck with a small room right behind the driver to sleep in. My uncle is intrigued by what kind of custom work this guy's done, so he goes along with him. Once they're in the truck, the guy shows him that he's built in the sleeper of the semi. It's a big, heavy-duty box. Apparently it has hydraulic arms on each side, so he can open and close it with the push of a button. He says once he pushes the button, it seals shut, and it can't be opened. My uncle is kind of weirded out by this, and cracks a few jokes about the box. The guy starts to get a little agitated. My uncle realizes this and decides it's time to leave this guy's semi. A few months later, he finds out that the guy was a serial killer, stuffing truck stop hookers and others into his custom hydraulic box. At this point in the story, his hand starts shaking and he can barely drink his beer. The guy was massive, he says. His hand could cover most of my head. He could have stuffed me in the box, and there's nothing I could have done to stop him. Or maybe there was someone in there already. He said he still has nightmares about it years later. There was a story on here a while back about a trucker who shared his creepiest experience while out on the road. It was getting very late and very dark, so we pulled into a rest area off the highway in the middle of nowhere. The place was totally empty, meaning there weren't any other vehicles or people there. While he was getting some shut-eye in his truck, he heard the faint sound of a barking dog that seemed to get louder and louder as time went by. Eventually, the nasty barking sound was coming from right outside his driver door. As he got up to look in the window, he didn't see a rabid dog, but instead it was some crazy-eyed person looking directly at him, growling and trying to get in. He started his engine and got the heck out of there. Growing up, my dad was a semi-truck driver. He drove full-time all over the country. We didn't get to see him very often, but he used to call home almost every night. And in the summers, my sister and I got to travel with him for a week or two. We called it trucking. This story happened when I was really little, probably 4 or so, and I don't really remember it. I was trucking with my dad, and he was experiencing some minor engine trouble. Before he was a truck driver, my dad was a mechanic and did most of his own truck repairs. He had pulled over into a small truck stop to work on the truck. There was a tree next to the parking lot, so he sat me down underneath it with my doll, and he worked on the truck right next to me. It was really hot, and while he was laying underneath the hot truck, my dad blacked out. I have no idea how long he was out. He was having a heat stroke. He finally came to with a splitting headache. He looked over to the tree to check on me, and I was still there playing with my doll. But behind me, he looked, and there was a man creeping up behind me, just about to reach out to grab me. I don't know how, but with the little energy my dad had left, he jumped out from under the truck yelling and swinging whatever tool he had by. The guy ran off and my dad collapsed. A lady working inside a truck stop saw the whole thing and came running out. She got me and my dad inside and took care of me while he cooled down. I don't know what would have happened if my dad hadn't have woke up when he did. My friends and I drove out to the Greyhound station along the highway to drop a friend off. There were 5 of us in total, with me sitting in the middle back seat. The station is adjacent to a truck stop, with the parking spots for the station perpendicular to the spots for the trucks. It just so happened that the spot we were parked in was in line with the cab of the truck parked perpendicular to us. We were just sitting there in the car, waiting for the bus, and my 2 friends in the front were turned so that they faced us in the back. Nothing special was particularly going on. It was just general chit-chat, with me being the only one with a clear view out the windshield. I happened to look up at the cab of the truck in front of us, and noticed a blinking little red light that seemed out of place in the bottom window. I looked a little closer and realized that the little red light belonged to a camera the trucker was holding that was pointed unmistakably directly at us. After I pointed this out to my friends and all attention was turned to him, the camera and creeper holding it quickly disappeared from sight. Needless to say, we also disappeared from sight, moving to a space as far away from the truck parking spots as possible. Not the worst thing that could have happened, but definitely creepy. I just don't understand what he was wanting to get out of filming us. I mean, we were just sitting in a car chatting. I just don't get it. I had a hooker climb into my truck while I was sleeping. My truck's passenger side door wasn't locked as well as I thought. I'd been hit in the parking lot by another truck, and it bent the door in a little. I tested the lock, and it seemed to lock and unlock fine, but that turned out to be wrong. It was about 1 a.m., and in my sleep, I sort of vaguely heard my door open. So I was already starting to wake up, but then someone shook me by the shoulder. I jumped up and I hit her in the face with my laptop, and we got into this weird hair-pulling slap fight, and physically I pushed and kicked her over the passenger seat out the door onto the pavement. I stood there half awake, blinking at her through the windshield when she jumped up and ran away. I went back to sleep, sort of. Woke up an hour or so later with someone knocking on my door. It was the police. She called and told them she was my girlfriend and I had beaten her up and thrown her out of a truck stop. I believe they were getting ready to handcuff me when a few drivers from the other trucks came over to explain she'd been knocking on all the truck doors that night, and was there most weekends, either knocking on doors or trying to climb into unlocked trucks. The cops didn't really say anything else to me. They just handcuffed her and drove away with her in the back. By the way, I'm not a male, I'm a female, and look nothing like the stereotypical idea of the manly female trucker. If you like my work and want to support me, you can donate to me at Patreon, patreon.com/Emoristar. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or evening. I'm Omori. Now, listen to the spooky tunes. My uncle was a truck driver for many years. He spent several years doing cross-country trips, often loading up his trailer in the middle of the night. While he waited for his trailer he unloaded, he'd make his way over to a nearby truck stop, have a late-night meal, and shoot the shit. Can I say that?